Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back to another Adobe XD Masterclass. My name is Howard Pinsky, Senior XD Evangelist here at Adobe. Hope you're all doing well on this Friday afternoon. As Drew says in the chat, we did it, people. We made it to Friday. We certainly did. If you are tuning live here on Behance, let me know in the chat who you are and where you're tuning in from. We've got Faisal and Jack, Laura, Drew, Wade, Michael, Rob, Umacorn, Katarina. Great to see all of you. Hope you're all having a great week. Hope you're all excited for the weekend. Hope you're all staying safe out there. Theo and Monica, Adriana, Moenda. Great to see you all. Alrighty, let's go ahead and hop over my screen. We're going to get going for Masterclass number 87. We're just 13 away from the big 100. I still don't know what I'm going to do for Masterclass number 100. We'll have to talk about that. Send me some tweets. Give me some suggestions. Maybe it'll just be one of those random classes where you all give me ideas and I run with it. We'll see. Alrighty. If you follow me on Twitter, you may have seen a little bit of a preview of what we're going to be doing today during our masterclass. We're going to be building out a task/to-do application in XD. Looks something similar to this. We'll see how far we get, but I would love your suggestions on what you would like to see in an application experience like this. Also, if you missed the news, we released an update last night/this morning, and we included 2 quality of life improvements, including the ability to rearrange states on your components, which is great, and also being able to author hyperlinks directly from the Properties Inspector in design mode. I'll be showing you both of those during today's class. And as a reminder, if anyone has suggestions or questions throughout this masterclass, definitely throw them in the chat. I will be taking a peek from time to time. Alrighty, boop, here we go. So we're in XD, and since this particular experience, Jack says, wait, what? I missed this update. Follow me on Twitter, follow Adobe XD on Twitter. She says, my head has been in work all day. I get those days too. Yeah, I totally understand. Sometimes news just goes right over my head. All right, so since this is a mobile experience, we're gonna start with a mobile template. We're gonna let's go for the iPhone 13. And I'm gonna maximize this. And here we go. So the first thing we're going to do is we're gonna start laying out the artboard. We're gonna add some information on the top for a header. We might tackle a navigation bar. But before we do all that, I might want to just set the stage and apply a little bit of color to the background. So I have the artboard selected right now in the Properties Inspector. Let's go ahead and maybe the top color, let's change it to a gradient to give a little bit of style to this. The top color is going to be quite light with a touch of blue in there. And the bottom color, we're going to introduce a little bit more blue. Now, as we start adding additional content, like I said, the navigation bar, the header, and all the different cards and stuff on top of this, we may have to go back and tweak it a little bit. We'll see. You want to make sure your gradients aren't too drastic, otherwise it's going to be very difficult to add in content. Drew says, this makes me think we'll be able to hyperlink individual words rather than an entire text box. Is that right? Well, Drew, let's find out. This is some text. Hello. Ooh. Hello. There we go. Let's make this a bit bigger. And you're going to notice inside of the Properties Inspector over to the right, we've got this new Insert URL text field. Now, previously, when we introduced hyperlinks, you had to go to prototype mode, and then you had to select an entire element of text. And then you would click, and then you can set a hyperlink right over here, right? Let's go back to design mode, because we don't have to do that anymore. Of course, you can if you want to. But with this selected, you can go ahead and just type in, let's say, HTTPS, and then boop.com, right? With 5 O's. Might be an actual thing. You never know. So that will create a hyperlink, and you can press play at the top and you can interact with it, or if you're previewing this on mobile, you can, not mobile too, but also the web, you can click on that to go to the link. But what Drew is asking is, can you select a specific bit of text and apply a link that way? You can. So I can select, let's say, some text and do the exact same thing. Boop.com, and there we go. Boop. So yes, the answer is yes. You can select just a little bit of text within a larger text field, and you can apply a hyperlink, which is great. Well, I know a lot of people were asking for that when hyperlinks initially came out, and the team was able to tackle it, which is great. All right. Drew's mind is blown, and Jack says, rearranging states makes my life easier, right? Little things that really make our lives that much better. All right, so we've got our artboard color looking okay. Again, we're probably going to make some changes to this at some point, but what I want to do is at the top, I want to start laying out some of the information. So we might want a menu icon, maybe a bell for notifications, and then of course the header. And this particular screen is the tasks. So I'm going to grab the text tool, type out something like tasks. And in terms of the styling, let's bump it up to about 28. And, in past masterclasses, I have really pushed the limits a little bit with display typefaces. We've gone a little bit too far, in my opinion. So today we're going to dial it back a little bit. We're going to go for something a little bit less crazy. And I'm going to try something like Astoria, which is a great typeface you can grab on Adobe Fonts. It's not as nutty as something like Belly, which I have been using in the past in some of my master classes. It's a nice typeface. We're going to keep it simple today. So back to Astoria. And let's go ahead and maybe bold this so it's nice and visible at the top. And in terms of the color, I'm going to set it at a nice dark blue. Now I'm just adding a touch of blue because we did introduce a little bit of blue in the background color on the artboard, and adding a little bit of blue to this text, even though it's very difficult to see, it just kind of gives that nice soothing appearance. Now we can bump this up a little bit more, and it almost starts to blend in, not completely blend in that you can't read it, but it's, Wade says boop.com is a thing. It might be. All right, so I'm gonna place this up here. Now you have to remember, and I mention this all the time, that if you're designing for an iPhone or some Android devices, we've got the notch. It's still a thing. It's still at the top of our device. So, you want to place it, I don't know, somewhere around, let's say 58 pixels from the top. That's one password. I don't need that right now. So somewhere around there, you can probably go a little bit higher, but definitely keep that in mind. And if you can, preview this on a mobile device so you can actually see how that looks and feels in your hand. So I'll keep it right about there. And then over to the left and the right, we want two icons. So I'm going to start by dragging out a guide on the left, put about 24 pixels from each side. 24 to 32 is a pretty good number for the margins and the padding on the side. We'll stick with 24 for now. And then if I go ahead and hop over to Nucleo, which is a third-party icon manager that I use all the time, I can type out something like menu, and I've got a nice menu icon right here. I can copy and paste it in here. Maybe I'll flip it. Snap it over to the right. Somewhere right about there. I can also drag a guide out just so I can line things up a little bit nicer. And I'm going to go ahead and preview now. It's looking a little bit too small. Might be also a little bit too light as well. So I'm going to bump up the size a little bit. Right now we're set to around 16 and 14. Let's bump this up to, I think 24 might be too big. Let's try 18 for the height. Now things might get a little bit wonky right now. Oh, okay, it didn't. What I was going to say is depending on how the icons are built, in this case it might all be one path possibly, I'm not quite sure. Yes, it is, so we wouldn't have that problem. But some icons, if they were built with 3 different paths for each of these lines, if we were to keep responsive resize on, then it would possibly stretch out a little bit. But in this case, it's only one path, so we didn't have that problem, which is great. And I'm going to bump up the size to, let's try 2. That could be a little bit better. And I'm also going to apply this color here. Now, knowing that I'm going to be using this specific color, hey Sam, great to see you, quite often, I'm going to hop over to my document assets and just add this. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, I didn't see this in our internal release notes. I didn't read them very well, but These over here look a little bit bolder than they were previously. So I think the team has also been spending a little bit of time making sure accessibility is bumped up a touch. So maybe it's just me. I don't know. Let me know in the chat if you noticed this. But I'm seeing a little bit of boldness going on, which is nice. Or at least darkening, which is great. All right, so I'm going to add this to my colors. And then over to the right, we want another icon, which is going to be a bell icon. So back over to Nucleo. Bell, nope, notification. Aha, there we go. And we'll grab, let's say, there's so many different kinds. Maybe this one looks pretty good. Now this one in particular is fill-based, right? As you can see down here. So we can't dive in and adjust the border unless we add a second border on top of it, but because of the way this icon is set up, that may not work. So let's see if this one is a little, nope. Some of them are in this library are fill, some of them are border. It's a little bit inconsistent, but it is what it is, right? Let's try another library. That one's kind of fun. Is this one border based? I think so. It is not. Okay. We'll get one. We'll get there. Or of course we could design one of our own. Or what we can also do is hop over to our plugins, go to the icons for design plugin, and then type out something like bell or notification. There we go. We've got some icons. Iconic is pretty good. Materials not too bad. I don't know if I love any of these. I like a nice style to my icons, which is why I initially went for the Cocoa icons. But these ones, maybe this one is border-based. No, that one's not border-based either. Very strange. All right, well, let's just go with this one for now. And then I'm going to increase this to, what did I do for the other one? Was it 18, I think? 18. Okay, it already is. It's close enough. All right, I'm gonna set the fill to this color again, or of course I can go to my document assets and click on it from there. Yeah, it's a little bit too small, a little bit too thin. The joys of icons, right? That could work. Sam says, I haven't updated and looks like it has been darkened. Ah, very good. All right, now one more thing we might want on this particular bell icon is to illustrate what a badge might look like. You know, if you have a notification, this might light up and there might be a little bit of a badge. So if I grab, let's say, the Ellipse tool and draw one out, I'll place it right about here. I'm going to set a color. Let's set maybe a nice reddish with a little bit of pink in there, something around there. And then to kind of simulate what maybe a cutout might look like in the bell without actually going and creating a Boolean object, I can add a border. I'll just sample this color in the background and maybe I'll bump the size up just a little bit more. That could do. Now, if we want to get a little bit fancy, which we typically do on Fancy Fridays, we could maybe convert this ellipse into a squircle. And I know some of you probably who will watch the Masterclass are big fans of squircles as well. There is a great plugin called the Super Ellipse plugin. So I'm going to hop into there and just increase this transform value just a little bit so we have a little bit more of a stylistic shape. Something like that. And that could work, right? Alrighty. I'm going to select all this information, group it, and call this header. Perfect. All right, the next thing we might want to tackle is down at the bottom of this experience, we're going to want a navigation bar. So to do that, I'm going to grab the rectangle and draw one out. I can always adjust the size later on, so I'm not super concerned about that at the moment. But what I do want to pay attention to is very similar to the notch at the top of our iPhones. We have a home indicator, which is just a line at the bottom of our phones as well, which is something like that. It's about 4 to 6 pixels. And it sits right about there, right? So definitely keep that in mind. And you don't want anything that you're going to be interacting with down below that line or too close to it. Otherwise, users might not be able to interact with those elements, right? So for this styling, we're going to keep it at white because we do have a little bit of a darker background behind it, so we can get away with that white box. I'll round to the corners quite a bit because we are going for a little bit of a, more stylistic, curvier design. And then to further help separate this navigation bar from the background, we may want to add a little bit of a subtle drop shadow. So I'm going to turn a drop shadow on down here in the Properties Inspector. And I'm gonna bump the Y value down quite a bit. Let's try 8 for now. Might have to bump it down a little bit more. I'm gonna set the color somewhere in this range here. So I don't wanna go pure black, because then it's gonna look a little bit strange with that bluish background. So I'm gonna add a little bit of blue in there and then bump that up a little bit. And then I can play with the opacity so it's nice and subtle. Somewhere around 10% looks pretty good. But I do think that if I take a look at the preview, it's still looking a little bit too harsh. So I want to make sure that it's nice and subtle while still separating this element from that background. So maybe I'll bump the Y value to about 16 and then blur it quite a bit, maybe somewhere around 24. There we go, that's looking a little bit better. So it's very subtle, but it still does the job of separating it from the background, which is great. And if you do need to, you can always select that artboard one more time and maybe make some changes to the color, maybe add a little bit more blue. Michael's asking, do you only design for iOS? Well, the nice thing about a lot of these designs that I work on is that they can be adapted pretty easily for Android as well. I typically design for iOS because I do have an iPhone and that's primarily what I do use, so I'm more familiar with it. But you know, a lot of them can be adapted for Android. I know they do have different guidelines, but for the most part, you can do that. I'm gonna move this down a little bit. It's bothering me. Actually, it's not too bad. I think it's fine. All right, so the navigation bar at the bottom. So we have our container, which I'm going to name container. And then on the inside, we may want a few icons, things like home, maybe a task list, an add button, calendar, and maybe a profile as well. So starting with the add button, with the ellipse tool, I'm gonna draw one out. Now this one's gonna be a little bit larger than some of the others because the primary function in this application is going to be adding tasks to your to-do list, right? So I'm gonna draw out an ellipse like that. And the color, this is probably gonna be the primary color. So ideally, when you're, before you start actually designing, you would go through the process of setting up your colors, character styles, and that sort of thing. And then you can apply them to your elements. We haven't done that because typically don't have as much time during these master classes. So we're gonna go for something like this for our primary color. It's a nice bluish purple, or blurple as some people call it. And then on the inside, we're gonna want a plus button. Now we could go ahead and just, use the text tool and add a plus button. It looks okay, right? We'd change the color to white. It looks fine, but because we're using a lot of curves and rounded elements in this particular design, we may want something to kind of match that. So with the line tool, I'm gonna draw one out. Bump it up in size a little bit, and then round out those caps. Seems like, according to Wade, the Epic Design Music Kit. Which song is that, by the way? Let's see. Looks like Benjamin Campbell, Northern something or other. Interesting. Okay. I've always been curious. Wade points it out every single time. Must be a good song. So I have one of them. I'm going to duplicate it, and then I'm going to rotate it about 90 degrees, and we have our plus button, which looks not bad, but doesn't line up perfectly, but it's fine. There we go. Now that's a little bit better. All right. So I'm going to group this and call this plus. Perfect. All right. Now, like I mentioned, we may want a few additional icons, home and tasks, that sort of thing. So back in Nucleo, I'm going to look up, let's say home. This one's kind of fun. Now, this is going to be the home screen, possibly. This will probably be the home screen, right? Even though it says tasks at the top, ignore that. This will be the home screen. So the active icon is going to be solid, and then the inactive are going to be border-based. So I'm going to copy this icon, pop it in here. Definitely want it quite a bit bigger. I'm thinking maybe somewhere around 28. And I'm going to also apply this darker color that we saved, and I'll position about 32 pixels from the left-hand side. And I'm holding down, if anyone's wondering, my Alt-Option key and just hovering over the left-hand side of this container, and it's giving me all the dimensions, which is wonderful. All right, so that's home. And then over here to the right, we might want something like maybe a checklist. This one could work. We could potentially also use this duotone Here to the right, we may want something like a calendar, and we'll use that same duotone icon, 28, and we'll make sure we dive in here and set the same colors. And then finally, was anyone buffer? Oh, maybe it was just me. Maybe it was me. That's why maybe my internet took a little bit of a blip. Ah, okay. I think it was me. It wasn't Creative Cloud. Interesting. It's funny because I got, we had someone come in here yesterday and try to fix our internet. I guess it didn't work. Anyways, profile or user. It did buffer, but all good. I'm gonna have to take a look at that after. All right. And finally, we've got our user icon, which we're going to use here. Now, when I was designing this initially, they didn't have a user icon that really matched this exact style, but we're going to see how this looks. It may work, it may not work, we'll see. Bump this up a little bit, and then the border we're going to set to this color as well, and make sure it is about 32 pixels like the other icon. All right, so I'm gonna make sure to align some of these icons a little bit, just like that, and make sure they're centered. And then on this side as well, selecting these and, all right. Yeah, that user icon over to the right is not working for me. But I don't want to spend too much time on the navigation bar, so we're gonna leave it for now. Ideally, I would probably change it, but I think we're gonna just run with it. I'm going to call this nav. And, also ideally, what we would do if we had a little bit more time, I definitely want to get to some of the stuff in the middle, which is the, the to-do list and the tasks and all that stuff. We would create components for each of these icons. So there would be an active and inactive state for each of the icons. And then the entire navigation bar, which I'll do now, will be a component as well. Again, don't have too much time today, so we're going to leave it at that. All right, now at the top here, we may want to kick off this screen with a bit of an overview of how your day is going or how your tasks are going. And it could be, there's so many different ways we can lay this out, but I think it'd be kind of fun to do sort of like a half ellipse for a chart. It kind of be broken down into different colors representing different tasks. So I'm going to grab my ellipse tool, draw one out from guide to guide, something like that. And then we're going to set a border. Somewhere around 40 looks pretty good, but we only want about half of this particular ellipse to be bordered, right? So I'm going to draw out a guide in the center just so I have something that helps me align all this up. And then inside of my properties inspector, I'm going to experiment with the dashes and the gaps. So I'm going to bump this up to like 2000 so we have basically a clean slate. And then I can start increasing the dash to fill my ellipse, right? And I'll stop it right around there. Perfect. All right, and that is done. Now, obviously, I don't want this particular chart to be sideways, so I'm going to just select this ellipse and hold down Shift and swivel it around. I might even want to bump this up in size. Let's try 48. It might be too big, but we'll see. We'll see how that looks. Now, this is going to be the overall day. So, start to finish over to the right. So we may want to drop the color a little bit of this so it kind of blends in with the background. We'll do something like this to start. Now, the important thing on this chart are going to be the different pieces that we create. So if we duplicate this existing shape, Command and Control D, we can go ahead and change the color to our first color, which might be a nice blue somewhere in this range. It's a nice blue right there. Look at that. And I'm also going to save this color to my assets because we might be using this in other areas. And with that done, I'm going to decrease the dash value now. And leave it right about there. And then we're going to duplicate again. And we're going to change the color. Maybe let's go for a nice green this time. Now this, I'm going to darken this a little bit. Now this one we want behind the blue. So for all of these, we just want to make sure to duplicate. Of course, we could do it backwards and do back to front, but I'm going to pop it behind and then increase the dash somewhere around here, and then we're going to do one more as well. So duplicate, plop it behind, which is Command and Control, and then left square bracket. And then this one we might want to change to a purple. Now I can't see it right now, so I'll increase the dash here, and we'll do something like this. And that's looking okay. Now the nice thing is, because these are all border based, I can select all of them at once and increase the size if I needed to, if I felt that they were a little bit too thin. I can also possibly get a little bit creative with this. So maybe this blue one, I might want to increase the size a little bit more. Let's see, how many were, 1, 2, 3. Actually, you know what, let's do it the other way. Let's do purple first. 1, 2, 3. And then we'll do green, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And then we'll do 9, right? So 10 and then -1. Just to get a little bit stylistic with it. Might not be necessary, but kind of fun, right? And I'm going to tweak this a touch as well. Perfect. All right, so we have our different sections, but of course, this only says so much, right? A user jumping into this application, they're going to see a bunch of colors. They're not going to really know what this is, right? So there are a few things we might want in this particular section. One, we may want a nice large text that says how much of your day or tasks you've completed. So this looks like it's a little bit over 50%. So 0, 100, yeah, it's about 55, right? So 55%. And we're going to apply that same color that we've been using. We'll keep it at Astoria. Maybe we'll bump up the weight to about extra bold. Why not, right? And we'll place it right about here. And then below this is a great place to maybe give a bit of a key as to what these different colors mean. So let's start with an ellipse. We'll draw one out here. And we did create a lovely squircle earlier, right? So we may want to keep that theme going. Probably don't want to use it too much in this application, but we can definitely throw it in from time to time. So I'll increase this to maybe about 50%, which I think was approximately what we went for the other one. And we're going to definitely want to use the same colors. Now I did go ahead and add the blue. I didn't add the green or the purple yet. So I'll do that. And then we will apply this color here. And then beside it, we want to indicate what exactly the blue chunk means. So we'll do something like, maybe this will be for meetings. 3 meetings. Drop this quite a bit. We probably don't need to go extra bold here, so we might want to drop it about 2 to medium. We're going to left align it. And, ooh, that's way too small, right? So we're going to bump that up. It's funny, I mention this all the time, right? When I'm designing on these masterclasses, I always tell all of you, when you're designing zoomed in, like I do a lot of the time, definitely hit that preview button as much as possible, or even take the preview screen and place on another monitor or else so you can see how things are looking. Because if you take a look here, when I'm zoomed in, this looks pretty good, right? It doesn't look too bad, it doesn't look that small, but then you launch the preview and you need a magnifying glass to actually see this, right? There it is in there. So we're definitely going to bump this up. Let's try about 14, see what that looks like, right? And this one here, I think that could work. I think that's fine. There we go. And I'm going to group this and I'll call this meetings. We'll duplicate this down. Actually, what we can also do is place this in this one group into a larger group. We'll call this key. Does that even make sense? I don't know. And then we're going to turn a stack on in the properties inspector. Now, because we only have one group inside of this larger group, it defined it as a horizontal stack. So we're going to switch it over to vertical, and then we can just duplicate it to pop another one right down below. This one is going to be, I think green was the next one. And maybe this will be set to, we'll do 2 deadlines, and then duplicate, and we'll set our purple. And then maybe we'll have, maybe also 2 personal. This will be for personal tasks, right? All right. Bring this in a little bit. We're going to make sure to center this. And I might want to also make sure that everything is aligned really nicely. It's close. All right, that could do for now. I'm not loving it completely, but I think it'll work. All right, now the next thing we're gonna do is, actually before that, I wanna make sure I group all this information, and we'll just call this progress. Now, right down below, we may want to kick off this section with a few cards for maybe some urgent or immediately upcoming tasks. And then down below that, we can put an actual checklist of information, right? So what we're gonna do is we're gonna pop the guides on. I'm gonna grab my rectangle tool, and we're gonna draw out the first task. So I'm gonna draw one out somewhere something like this, right? And I wanna bring this in a little bit because I don't want it to snap directly to the center, because if I were to do that and I were to create another card on this side, they would be right on top of each other, which we don't want. We want a little bit of breathing room. So if I reduce the size by about, let's say 8 pixels, so 10 and then bring it back by 2, then we'll have a nice 16 pixels in between each, which could work, right? 16 or 8 is probably good depending on how much breathing room you want in between each. And I'm gonna round out the corners a little bit on these containers. We'll start with 8 and we'll see what that looks like. And actually very similar to this navigation bar, we may want to put a little bit of a subtle shadow behind those cards. So what I can do is I can actually select the container of the navigation bar, copy it to my clipboard, and then on this card, I can select it, right click, and then paste the appearance. So it's going to take that drop shadow and the rounded corners and pop it on there for me. And I can bring these corners back if I need to. And that could work. I think the shadow looks a little bit too harsh in this particular section, so I'm just going to bring it back a little bit more and see what that looks like. Maybe I'll even blur it a touch more as well. All right. Sam says, when did Adobe Color come out? So Adobe Color has been out for, I don't even know how many years, possibly even a decade. It started as something called Cooler, Kulur, I think it was. Cooler? I think it was that. And then it eventually switched over to Adobe Color, but it's been out for a long time. And as Eric has pointed out, there is a color blind safe section on Adobe Color, which is wonderful. They've been adding, Umacorn says Kuler, that's the one. Yeah, they've been adding some additional accessibility features and things like that. So yeah, definitely check out color.adobe.com. It's a great resource. All right, so we have this box set up and looking pretty good. And then we want to start adding in some information into this. Now, because we have a lot of color-coded areas, right? And we have these different tasks that are color-coded, we may want to kick off these cards with that color. So we might want to do something like this, right? And we'll set this color here. And so this one, blue, is going to be a meeting. So I'm going to just grab my text tool, type out something like meeting. We'll change the color to white. And this will be a nice opportunity to use padding, depending on if you want this particular tag to auto adjust on each card, right? Sometimes you may want to keep this at a specific size and have it be consistent. Sometimes you may want it to auto adjust. In this case, let's try auto adjusting and see what happens. So I'm going to select both of these elements, group them. I'll call this tag. And then over within the properties inspector, I'm going to turn on padding, which is going to look at the text layer and then that background shape and then automatically set the padding. And I can always dive in here and adjust it if I need to. Let's just bump this up a little bit. So that way, if I do change this to, let's say, personal, it's going to automatically adjust. And if I center it, it'll adjust from the center, right? Which is great. And then to give it a little bit of style, I might want to maybe round out the corners, but not necessarily the corners on the top, left and right. So I can hold down Alt Option and then bring these corners back, or in the Properties Inspector, I can do the same thing. So we have our top left, top right, and then bottom left. So I'll want to bring this one back a little bit. All right, that could do. It's kind of fun, right? Perfect. And then down below this, we may want to lead with the actual task itself, just so we get the user's attention immediately. So we'll grab our text tool. And in this case, instead of just clicking, which will create point text, we want to click and drag to set our bounds. And we'll do something like, what do we do for this task? Stream, oops, I should probably change the color. Stream Masterclass on Adobe Live, right? There we go, very meta. And I'll bump this up to maybe bold. That looks pretty good. And you notice, because I clicked and dragged to create that fixed width text box, as I got to the end, all the people, right? Persons, people. As I got to the end of that text box, it automatically bumped down to the next line, which is great. All right, so I'll position this about 16. And then down below, because this is one of our longer cards, it may have additional information. Maybe there'll be some tags that we have set while setting up a task. It'll have the time, and it'll have maybe some users, maybe all of you. It'll have all your little pictures, right? So let's start with the time, which is 12 o'clock p.m. PST. This one we can drop a little bit in size possibly, or maybe we'll keep this at 14 and maybe we'll bump this up a little bit to about 16. But I'm going to drop it in. Do I want to drop it in weight? I think it might be okay as bold, right? And then, like I mentioned, we may want some tags, so we're going to drag one out, very similar to what we did here, but they're going to be a little bit smaller. So we'll drag out a container, and we'll set the size in just a moment, and we'll do something like live stream. Definitely want to bump this down maybe to 10 or 8, something like that. We're going to drop the weight as well a little bit. And this one will be left aligned, because as we change the tags, we wanted to kind of adjust from the left-hand side. And then if I select both of these, we're going to pop padding on, which is great. And then in terms of the styling, what do we want to do here? Do we want to keep it at blue? Probably not, right? Probably don't want to do blue, because then it'll stand out too much and it might get a little bit confusing. It's not bad though. Blue could potentially, or maybe we can do, no, because I think down below we're going to add blue for the actual join and the buttons down below. So we probably don't want to do blue in this case. So maybe we'll do like a lighter color like this, still in that blue range, but a little bit lighter. Now you got to be careful here. I'll point this out. I don't know if we're going to change it today, but once I lightened up that button, it's becoming a little bit difficult to read, right? We've got white text on a slightly lighter background. So, check your accessibility, make sure it passes. This one definitely will not pass. So in this case, what we can do is maybe darken it a little bit. We'll do something like this. I don't love that color. I don't love either of the colors, to be honest. But yeah, definitely keep that in mind. All right. So we'll have one tag, we'll group this, turn a stack on, and then boop, and then Adobe XD. All right. And then down below, like I mentioned, we might want little images of some of the users that are in this stream. So if I grab my Ellipse tool, I'll draw out the first user. And let's take a look at how this is looking. That looks okay. And then I'm going to, let's duplicate, let's create a repeat grid. Actually, let's add a border first. Now the border is going to be the exact same color as the background, which is white. You're going to see why we're going to do this in a moment. So I'm going to create a repeat grid, Command and Control R, or the repeat grid button at the top. Boop. And there's the boop. And we're going to drag out a bunch of different users. We'll just go crazy, all these users. And then if I hop over to my Creative Cloud libraries, I do have a typefaces library, and I can just start adding in how many do we have? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So we're gonna do 1, 2, we'll put me in there. 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9. Boop. Perfect. And then the reason I added that border on these shapes, even though it's the same color as the background, is because I want a little bit of an overlap between all these users. So if I select the repeat grid and hover in between any of the cells, I can drag this back a little bit and have a little bit of an overlap there, which is kind of fun, right? There we go. All right. It's a little bit too small, but it'll do for now. And one thing I might also want to do is group all this information here. So I'm going to select all these layers, group, call this content, and this will allow me to turn another stack on this element. And what's nice about this is I can very easily now jump in here and just swap the position of these elements, right? So if I wanted the tags maybe closer to the top and the time a little bit further down, I can very easily do that. And as I add more information, if I want to maybe add some more tags and just duplicate, it would all move down right below. All right. And then finally, down below the people, I may want two buttons, one to join the live stream and then maybe one to edit RSVP or edit information, something like that, right? So I'm going to draw out, let's put it about 16 from each side. Now this first one is going to be actually to join, and this is going to be the primary call to action. So in this case, we're going to go for our blue color that we saved. Now it doesn't have to necessarily be this specific color because we are using this to indicate meeting. It could work in this case because it is a way to join the meeting, so that could work. Now if I were to simply click with my text tool now, right? Because we have a stack on inside of this group, it did what it's supposed to do, and it placed that new text layer above it or below it, depending on where your cursor was. So we'll want to make sure to just group this particular rectangle, and I'll call this button. And then inside of the group, we can now use our text and then join live stream. Now is live stream one word or two words? I always get that wrong. We're going to run with 2 words for now. And then I'll bump this up to bold. Center it. Let's see what the size looks like. A little too small. 12 could work. All right. And then this is a good opportunity to start using components. So, this particular button, we may have a few different states, at least 2. So I'm going to, with the button selected, I'm going to press the plus button within the properties inspector or Command or Control K. And then we'll want to create one more new state. So if I press the plus button one more time, we'll do a new state. And this will be called, let's say, outlined. On Behance, it's 1, but in my eyes, it's both, Sam says. Chris says 1 word. Could be 1 word. I've seen it both ways, but we're going to run with 1 word. So the outline button, what we're going to do is we're simply going to set the border at the blue color. Whoops, I think I just missed there we go. And then we're going to turn off the fill. We're also going to use the blue color for the text, and we'll do something like edit event. And I might want to bump up the size of the border just a little bit. There we go. Perfect. So what we can do now is duplicate this particular button, switch it over to outlined, and that looks pretty good. Now, I did mention at the beginning of this masterclass that we also ship the ability to rearrange component states. Now, in this case, we only have 1 additional state, but let's go ahead and create 1 more state. And even though a hover state doesn't apply to mobile, at least not in a phone situation, we're going to add a hover state just for this example. And I will just jump in here and just change the color a little bit lighter, right? So that when I do go ahead and hover, we have a little bit of a hover state. Again, doesn't apply for mobile, but we're going to run with it. But what I want to show you is that now in your properties inspector where the components are, if you wanted hover state above your outline state, boop. That's simple, right? And I say simple, right? It seems simple. For me, just dragging a component state on top of another component state and then having them rearrange seems like, oh, well, why wasn't that there to begin with? I follow the engineering side of things internally sometimes, and you'd be surprised at how difficult, not necessarily difficult, but there are a lot of moving parts to make that happen. It's not just, enabling drag and drop within the properties inspector. There's a lot of moving parts. That's usually why some simple features take longer than you would expect, because one thing, there's so many different steps that are involved, and sometimes there's different architectural things that have to go on well below this particular feature to make that happen. But here it is. And it works great, which is wonderful, right? Sam says, what are the use cases for rearranging component states? Sometimes it's personal preference. Sometimes you just want, some certain component states on the top, and sometimes you want some on the bottom. There are a lot of different use cases, but we have heard a lot from users that they want to be able to rearrange those component states. So it's there now. All right, 8, 8, and this is going to drop to 8. That looks pretty good. 13, 16. Drew says better organization indeed. All right, so we have our container and our first card looking pretty good. So this will be meeting. All right, so now over to the right, we may want maybe 2 additional cards. So we might want to stagger things a little bit, right? So over here, what we're going to do is we could go ahead and duplicate this, but because we want a completely different card, or we could do that. We could just kind of duplicate it and then get rid of the information we don't want. Like, we probably don't need that, and we probably don't need the buttons either. Or maybe we do want the buttons. Maybe we just want one button, right? And this might be possibly a deadline. And in this case, we have our green that we're going to be using. And let's see. So on the example that I posted, I just posted post Masterclass teaser on Twitter, right? And I'll have that deadline for 9 a.m. Oops. And maybe this task tool is very complex and it allows you to post directly from something like this. So we'll just post on, or maybe just tweet, right? There we go. Something like that. Now, a question we have to ask ourselves is, do we want to match this button here, with the actual the task color? In this case, probably not. Not just because tweet is typically blue, but also if we have too many different colors for buttons, it's going to get a little bit, as Sam says, green button in the chat. I think it might get a little bit too crazy, especially if we also have a purple one as well. So I think keeping the buttons, I don't know, words are hard. Keeping the buttons nice and consistent, I think, is probably the way to go in this case. All right, and then we'll do that. And then we might want one more down below. Now this is where things get a little bit interesting, right? Because we want these to line up. At least I think so. And probably don't want something like this, because then we'd have to have something over here. It would just look a bit strange. So we want these to line up. So I'm going to get rid of the button. Oops. There we go. Let's move this down. We probably also want the same amount of padding in between. So we'll probably want 16. But then that leaves us with not a lot of space, right? So maybe let's just get rid of this, at least for now, just so we have just so we're able to line things up a little bit easier, right? That'll do for now. And then we'll do personal, purple, and then order burritos, because why not, right? And maybe this will be after the masterclass, which is at 1:05 p.m. And what I should also be doing, now the reason I'm not doing this is because, what I should be doing is using padding on these larger groups. And the reason I'm not doing that is because I don't want them to auto adjust, because I want everything to line up kind of, all squared off. So that's kind of the reason I'm not doing that. And then position this in the center. There we go. All right, so we have our cards in place looking pretty good. And the last thing we're going to do before we wrap things up is create one more section down below for the actual task list. So these will be, checkboxes that you'll be able to turn on or off. So we're going to kick off this section with a header. So we'll call this maybe all tasks. And we'll bump this up to maybe about 18. We'll left align it, pop it about here. And ideally there would be an icon over to the right-hand side, maybe a filter icon. I'm gonna leave it as a circle for now, because I do want to get to the actual checkboxes, because we're gonna be using components to wire those up as well. So for these, we want two different states. We want an unchecked state, and we also want a checked state. And we want them to be very different. So let's create, maybe we'll do one more squircle, because why not, right? Now, this one's going to be the unchecked state. So we want it to be a little bit hollow, but also not too hollow that we can't see it. So we'll do something like, for the fill, we'll do something like this, and then we'll do a slightly darker version of that color for the border. Drop that down. Maybe we'll bump it up in size a little bit. Maybe, possibly. Something like that. Not loving it completely, but we're going to run with it. And then we're going to put the task over to the right-hand side. Task goes here. Drop this in size a little bit. And then underneath it, we'll do date, time. Just as placeholder for now. I'm going to drop the weight as well, maybe to medium or even possibly regular, but we'll see what medium looks like. And then I think this color might be too, that's not too bad. Okay. All right. Move this down a little bit. And then over to the right, there would probably be also like a menu icon. But what I do want to get to quickly is actually wiring this up so we have two different states that we can toggle between. And what's nice is we can actually create a toggle state. So I have this one selected. I'm going to press the plus button to create a component. We already have our default state looking pretty good. I'm going to press the plus button one more time and create a toggle state. And if you haven't used toggle states yet, essentially what they are is once you wire it up, once you create this new toggle state, it's going to automatically wire up your default state to the toggle state, and then the toggle state back to your default. And you're going to see that in action in just a moment. So toggle state, and like I mentioned, this is going to be the checked state. So we're going to change this to something like a green. We probably don't need the border. Let's do a nice green color like this. That's kind of fun. We could possibly put a border on it if we wanted to. We'll do something similar, and then maybe drop it a little bit. Maybe, we'll see. But on the inside, we'll want a check mark. Now, of course, you can use an icon, or you can grab the pen tool and boop, boop, and boop. Let's change this color to white. Thicken it up a little bit. Round out those caps. Round out the joints. That looks pretty good. I'm digging it. So we have our default state and we have our toggle state. And instead of going into prototype mode and manually wiring up state 1 to state 2 and state 2 to state 1, we can simply press the play button at the top, and we have our task, and we can click and click, right? And there's a little bit of a fade there. So if you did want to remove that fade, you can very easily go into prototype mode and then make some changes. Or if you also had some animation going on, let's say you had this one on state 1, but in a collapse state, it would animate automatically to state 2, which is wonderful. But very quickly, just to wrap this up, we can create a repeat grid, add a few additional tasks, and we can very easily just go through and turn them all on or off as we like, right? Beautiful. Alrighty, friends, that is going to wrap things up for me for today. Kyle T. Webster is coming up in just a few minutes. A big thank you to everyone who has tuned in today. I'm going to be back next week with another masterclass, and I will see you all then. Thanks, everyone.